Hello and welcome to another Parallel Project Training podcast. My name's Ruth Phillips and I'm here with Carmen Campos, and today we're going to be talking about schedule management with relation to the APM PMQ syllabus for exams starting in September 2024. Welcome to the podcast, Carmen.
Hello, everyone.
So, schedule management, quite important for us and our work as project managers. Before we start looking at the in-depth learning outcomes, Carmen, can you tell me what a project schedule is? What is the activity of scheduling?
So I would say in very simple words, a schedule is a timetable. Is the timeline that shows all the forecasts, start and end of the activities within a project. So when you create a schedule, you will use a process to try to determine that, and in order to give you what is the overall duration of that project.
People confuse a plan with a schedule. Let's set the record straight now. What's a plan? How's it different from a schedule?
So a plan will give you information not only about the timelines, but also about what needs to happen. So if you think about some of the plans in the project management plan, risk management plan, configuration management plan, it covers all of that in more detail. When we're looking at the schedule, we're looking at essentially the when. So when all these activities need to start or are predicted to start and finish within the project.
We're looking here at that timetabling of activities and resources for our project, not the wider plan. This is very much just about the when are those things going to happen.
That's right.
Let's have a look at the learning outcomes in the syllabus now. So the first one is actually about defining scope. And they want us to know how to define that scope in terms of outputs, outcomes, and benefits. Why is scope suddenly cropping up when we're talking about scheduling?
That is a very interesting question, because scope in the previous qualification used to be a completely different section. In order to create a schedule, probably the first thing that needs to happen is we need to define the baseline scope of work.
If we don't know that, we can't know what activities have to go on, we can't estimate, we don't know the resources. The scope is very much the starting point, isn't it?
Yes,
Okay.
That's right.
So it says that we should define our scope in terms of outputs, outcomes and benefits. There's quite a bit of project management terminology there. Tell me a little bit about that. First of all, what is our project scope?
Okay, the scope is everything that the project will deliver. So I mean by that all the products, outputs, outcomes and benefits, and also the work that the project will have to undertake to achieve all of those. So in very short, a sentence is everything that the project will deliver and all the work that the project will do. That high-level scope needs to be thought through at the start of the project. When the project put a business case to deliver something, so for example, you are building a new hotel, that will be your output. Then that output is going to achieve a change. We said in one of our podcasts, projects are unique and deliver changes. So the outcome of building my new hotel, which is my output, could be, for example, increasing accommodation or increasing the capacity of lodging in an area. So your outcome is a change.
Yeah.
Now, the benefits that the project is trying to achieve is the impact of that change. For different stakeholders, the benefits will be different. So building a hotel, you have financial benefits.
Yeah.
For the local businesses, it may be a benefit because if you have a new hotel in the area, that may attract more people going to things like cafes. So that could be a benefit of economic growth, or it could generate employment. You will need staff to run the hotel as well. So the first thing we need to think about is the outputs, the outcomes, and the benefits as a result of that project.
That's quite a wide definition of scope, isn't it? If you were just talking colloquially and you said, what's the scope of that piece of work? I think people would first of all think, what's the work I have to do to deliver something, i.e. the output? But we're also including the outcomes and the benefits and all of the work that needs to achieve all of that within our scope. It is really quite a wide definition.
Yes, it is. So the difficult part comes now when we need to put more detail. And it's particularly difficult for linear projects because linear projects rely on having a very good definition of the scope at the outset.
That big design up front, whereas the iterative project will develop their scope. Their scope will evolve as they go through each of those iterations. So this is work that's done in a lot more detail in a linear project. We talked about during the concept phase, we're putting together and getting the approval for our business case. We'll do quite a bit of work on this, but at the high level, the output, the outcomes, and start to put the meat on those benefits. How do we then actually get that more detailed scope within the definition phase? What are the things that we have to do?
So we could use some tools and techniques to help us mapping out all the deliverables and products that will constitute that hotel, and also all the work that we need to do to develop that new hotel. It's quite important to think not only about the output itself, but also your outcomes and your benefits. For example, if your hotel is going to be a 5-star resort with all the cafes and attractions included within the hotel, you're not going to achieve that benefit of helping the local businesses. A robust business case will really help the project manager when trying to think about all the products and deliverables. You could use a product breakdown structure to start breaking down that main output into the constituent parts. Take the hotel again as an example. So you may break down the hotel into the outside products like your car park, maybe a playground. You may have a separate spa, and then you'll have your main building. You may need to define in more detail what is going the main building comprise, your rooms, your restaurant, maybe you have a gym. So that is going to help you to identify all these deliverables.
Yeah.
But we must not forget some of the more managerial products. So things like documentation, a project management plan, any other processes that you may have to develop, that also has to be delivered.
Absolutely. So the byproducts of us managing the project, the physical technical products themselves, all of that needs to be thought about.
Exactly. So that exercise helps you to visually represent all of that in a more structured way.
So I can see we've got this hierarchical visual representation then of everything that we're going to deliver. How much detail do we go into? How far do we break each of those products or outputs that the project is going to produce into?
Well, it depends. There is not just one answer that fits all the projects. It depends on the scale and the magnitude of the project. The only two key considerations, I would say, is that each of these products or deliverables, I'm going to use these terms interchangeably, any of these products will have to have a unique identification and also a set of requirements associated, and that is going to help you later on during the delivery of the project to manage the scope and to control changes as well further down the line. When you check for quality, you're going to check against those specifications.
That makes sense. So that's our product breakdown structure. The syllabus mentions a work breakdown structure. How's that different?
So in terms of the tool, they work in the same way. They both provide a visual representation. And in this case, the work breakdown structure looks at the scope of work. So now we're going to map out all the activities, all the different elements of the work that will constitute the baseline of the scope of work. So picking the same example, when you deliver a hotel, all these products within the hotel, there may be some design work, there may be some groundwork, construction, electrical work, plumbing. So you do some design work because you need to deliver some drawings. Your drawings is your deliverable in your PBS. The work is the design work. You do construction work and you end up with a wall. So the wall is your product. The construction work is your task in the WBS.
That makes sense. And I can see the difference. But why do we need both? Why can't we just create a WBS, for example, or Why not just the PBS?
It's helpful to have both because by doing this an exercise, you may find things that you miss out. You may start thinking about the products and that helps you identify what work you need to do.
Yeah.
Or you may start detailing the work and then you realize, oh, we forgot this product. Yes. At the end of the day, the activities, the tasks that you put at your lowest level are the things that you will use when it comes to scheduling the project. This is basis for creating the schedule.
The syllabus also mentions a cost breakdown structure. We talked about a cost breakdown structure in a lot more detail in another podcast on budgeting and cost control. Could you just briefly describe what the CBS is and how that's linked into this topic of schedule management?
Yeah, sure. The cost breakdown structure is pretty much used in the same way as the other two. But what we do now is to break down all the different cost categories within the project. Typically, we will be putting things like people, equipment, materials, expenses, maybe managerial overheads. The idea is, in combination with other breakdown structures, the cost breakdown structure can help you assigning cost. So, for example, you could assign costs for each of the work packages. So that is going to allow the project manager to have an overall financial view of the project. And once you have assigned all these costs, it will be quite useful to have that level of granularity because it could help you tracking and see how well the project is performing against those. So it almost serves two purposes.
I've got a good impression there of how the PBS and the CBS helps us with that definition of scope, because we're trying to get to what are the activities we need, what are the resources that we need. Those are good methods that can help with that. Our next learning outcome then is to understand the links and dependencies between activities, both within a project and with business as usual activity. How do we go from having a work breakdown structure, understanding the types of resource, the cost of resource, into having more of a formed schedule with dependencies?
That's a good question. We have defined the scope of work and we have gained agreement from the stakeholders. We need to start thinking about the dependencies and the logical sequence of those tasks, because the WBS only represents them in a hierarchical manner. We need to start thinking about what needs to happen before what.
Yeah.
For example, you cannot plaster the walls of the hotel until you figure out where the plumbing is going to go. Once you have established what needs to happen before what are the connections, what are the interdependencies amongst the activities and the logical order, then you need to think about the resources that you will need to complete that. And the good thing about the WBS is that it gives you a really good starting point to think about what resources you need. So if you know you need to do some electrical work, you will start thinking you got to need electricians and so on. Some of these resources will be project team members, but often projects need to use external resources or resources from business as usual. So you need to think about the dependencies as well with the business as usual activities.
There could be things that are going on in business as usual that mean that resources aren't available or aren't available in the order that you need them in. So there's lots of links and dependencies. There's the natural dependencies between activities that you can't paint a wall until the plaster's dried. And also the resource dependencies that if, for example, you need a financial accountant on your project and it's business as usual month end, they're possibly not going to be available at the time that you'd like them to be.
Yes, exactly. And when we talk about resources, we have a different podcast on resource management. We also need to remember other categories of resources. You could have the painter available to paint the walls when the schedule needs them to. But if the paint has a long lead time and won't be available at the time is in the schedule, you may have to revise that and optimize it. We need to estimate durations without knowing exactly who is going to be doing the work. Your estimate is just going to be a prediction of the most probable duration to complete that, but it may be wrong.
Which takes me very nicely now onto our final learning outcome, which is about that estimation. As you said, estimates are based on a lot of things, type of resources, levels of skills of resources, etc. So there's going to be a need to re-estimate and optimize our schedule as we move through the project lifecycle. What are some of the reasons why we might need to do that? And what are some of the benefits for doing that as you go through our project?
I'm going to start with the benefits. Overall, the benefit is to increase the accuracy of our estimates. As more information becomes available, you will have more confidence in your estimates. And if you have more confidence in your estimates, you have a better chance to adhere to that plan and therefore deliver against the success criteria. There are a number of reasons why a project may have to re-estimate throughout. Some of the most typical ones would be assumptions may be proven wrong. In linear projects, we need to make estimates right at the start, and often you have more information available later on, or some of the assumptions have been proven right or wrong, and you need to adjust.
I've got a lovely picture that shows a project manager sat in front of a crystal ball, and the caption at the top says, "I'm a project manager, not a magician." And early on in the project, so much is unknown. You haven't got the confidence in those estimates that early on because a lot of them are based on assumptions and lots of information may be missing, etc. So as that information becomes better known, then absolutely, let's re-estimate our schedule as we know more so that we can deliver more accuracy.
Yeah, that's true. We talk about one of the reasons, more information, maybe more confirmation on assumptions. Another typical reason, changes. So changes approved following change control process may lead to the project manager to have to re-estimate. External factors may have changed as well.
It's those knock-on effects, isn't it?
Exactly. And it's a really good example because that emphasizes the importance of the PBS. Understanding the relation with the other products can help you as well when you're doing your estimates. Risk, so consider both threats and opportunities. If the project can take an opportunity, you may want to re-estimate that and maybe remove some contingencies or reserves that you don't need to use, or the other way around. If a threat has occurred and the responses that we planned were not effective in the first place, the project may have to re-estimate. And finally, more expertise from technical team members or people that get involved later in the project that can use that expertise to help you producing more accurate estimates.
So there are a couple of methods that we talk about in the PMQ course, critical path and critical chain, that can help us with this. Now, it's a lot easier for people to understand these methods when they have a visual diagram to step through this. And certainly if anybody is doing a PMQ course with Parallel, then you can see all of that in your study guide. But Carmen, could you just very high level maybe describe what both of these methods are and how they help us?
Sure. It's quite tricky, as you said, without a visual aid. But let's start with the critical path. Critical path analysis is a technique that you could use to identify what is going to be the shortest time to complete all the activities of the project in a logical order. People project schedules in software planning tools like Primavera or Microsoft Project can automatically calculate that because the critical path just uses the information flow. It uses the start and end of all these activities. When is the earliest I can start and end, and what is the latest that activity has to start and end, to try to calculate what is that sequence of activities that tells you the shortest time to complete the project.
Even though we have got quite powerful software to help us do this, it's always a good idea to understand the underlying logic so that you can check what the software produces.
In a nutshell, what the software is going to do is going to look at what is the earliest that you could complete all these activities in logical order, and then what is the latest that all these tasks need to happen. That will allow the project manager to know which activities have flowed, wiggle room, and which ones don't. And by having that information, then the project manager could put more attention, more focus on all these activities within the critical path, because that means if something happens there, if the activity takes longer or the activity starts later than we want it to, that's going to have an impact on the end date.
So that's the critical path. What's the critical chain method?
The critical chain method put more emphasis on the resources. So rather than looking at the sequence of activities, what the critical chain does is consider the resources that are available for the project and then derive the shortest time to complete the project based on those resources. Right. So the critical chain, unlike the critical path, takes into account those resource constraints, whereas the critical path just think about timings and interdependencies.
I would recommend if people do have their study guides that you have a look at the visualization of both of those methods, because it's a lot easier to understand how they can help us. I think we've covered those 3 learning outcomes well, Carmen. We've looked at how you define your scope. We've discussed outputs, outcomes, benefits, and then producing activities that are required to go ahead in our project through product, work, and cost breakdown structures. Then we talked about links and dependencies, both within the project and with other activities in business as usual or other projects. Finally, we've looked at re-estimating, schedule optimization, why we need to do that, how that'll help us, and some of the techniques that we can use for that throughout the life cycle. We've had a good look at schedule management. Thanks very much, Carmen.
Thank you.